I'm going to tell you about the day a homeowners association tried to claim a slice of the sky, the road, and the river, the day a woman with a shiny name tag and a brittle smile dialed 911 on an 82-year-old man because he dared cast a line in water the state pays to keep clean, a day that started with a cranky letter full of bolded bylaws and ended with a singing plastic fish nailed to a cedar fence like a trophy from a comedy. And if you think that's the whole story, it isn't, because the edges spill over into a flooded wedding, an RV that never started again, and a kid at a call center who fixed a broken rule by following it to the letter until the rule bent first. The place is Red Arroyo, Texas, a town where the sun comes up like it owns the place and the wind moves dirt from one county to the next just to keep everyone honest. We live off a Tulane that hums all day with trucks hauling hay and cabinets and hopes. And tucked behind that road is a neighborhood called Mesquite Bend. 54 houses, 3 cul-de-sacs, one pool that always smells like summer, and a little sign at the entrance that says, "Please drive like your kids live here," which most folks do, until power gets hungry and starts speed walking. I wasn't looking for trouble, I swear. I was just trying to keep dues low and fences upright. I'd served as HOA president a few years back and got called a saint and a slacker in the same week, which is pretty much the job description. Keep the lights on at the pavilion, don't snoop. Keep the budget tight enough to whistle, and remember the bylaws are there to stop a purple castle from sprouting on Lot 21, not to bully people into sweeping their porch twice a day. We had a good thing going. Until Sierra Paulson rolled in with a moving truck and a sense of mission. Her husband waved from the cab. She walked the sidewalk with a clipboard. She smiled like a realtor, and in the very first meeting she stood up, cleared her throat, and declared our pool out of code. Dangerous, unlawful, closed as of yesterday. We looked it up, right there with the county page on a projector older than some of the kids splashing in August. The code had changed, but the pool was grandfathered. The lifeguard fanny pack was more regulated than the chlorine. I told Sierra kindly and publicly that she was mistaken. She nodded. She didn't blush, and next month she came back with a new infraction, and the month after that she brought photos, close-ups of gutters and garden gnomes, and when I asked how she'd taken them, she shrugged and said she was just documenting from wherever she needed to stand to get the shot, which in at least 3 cases was the middle of somebody's petunias. So I said, and I made sure everyone heard me, that if she emailed me a photo of a supposed violation, I'd look into it, all the way, but I'd also email the homeowner and let them know exactly who was on their lawn with a camera. Transparency cuts both ways. The phone rang that night. Sierra's voice shook like ice in a glass. "That's not what you want to have happen," she said, and I told her actions attached themselves to names. The photos stopped. The meetings were quieter for about a month. And then the river rose. In the bend north of us, there's a straight little canal everyone calls Dry Creek, even though it isn't dry, and it's more a state drainage/wildlife run than a creek. It belongs to the public and to memory. My granddad taught me how to throw a line there when the banks were higher and my patience was shorter, and that's where Mr. Ellis, our neighbor, our storyteller, our retired cattleman who put in 50 harvests before his eyes started fighting the horizon, likes to fish. He goes with a soft cooler, a folding chair, a hat that used to be straw and is now history, and his license tucked in his wallet next to a photo of his late wife tucked next to a grocery list he never throws away. Floods came through the county the month before, ugly ones, the kind that grab dumpsters and turn them into boats. Not here at Mesquite Bend, not like the towns you saw on the news, but enough that people flinched when rain hit a tin roof. And one thin blue morning, when the water in Dry Creek had settled back into its banks like a dog curling into its bed, Mr. Ellis set up on the shady side near the culvert. Nothing dramatic, just the small theater of a man who's done something 1,000 times. And will do it 1,000 more. That's when Sierra showed up, not in a meeting, not in a newsletter, in person, like a storm cloud with French tips. "You're in violation," she said first, not hello, not sir, not how's the bite. HOA bylaws prohibit fishing within the community. And Mr. Ellis, who has spent more time saying nothing than most people spend online, reached for his wallet slowly, set his laminated state license on the arm of his chair like a playing card, and said, careful but clear, "Ma'am, this is state property. My license says I can be here." And Sierra's voice went up a notch like a fire alarm with a dying battery. "You're disturbing wildlife, and frankly, at your age, it's unsafe. "You're scaring children," she said, while two teenagers 50 feet downstream tried not to laugh into their tackle boxes. Now there's only so much dignity you can wring out of any morning when someone's yelling at you for breathing in the wrong zip code. But Mr. Ellis has a way of making silence heavy. He told me later he looked out over the ripple, counted 3 turtles on a log, and decided he wasn't going to move. That was his whole calculation. "I have a right to be here. I'm going to stay." Sierra dialed 911. She put it on speaker. She told the operator there was a man illegally fishing on HOA water, harassing her, threatening the peace, and while she waited, she started chucking small rocks into the water like she could pelt the fish into safer politics. When the officers arrived, they always look younger than they used to, don't they? They did what officers do when there's more theater than crime. They separated the voices from the facts. They asked for Mr. Ellis's license. They read it. They looked at Sierra's printouts and a letter she'd typed up on mesquite bin letterhead, declaring a newly enacted no fishing rule within and adjacent to the neighborhood boundaries. They looked back at the creek. The officers radioed a dispatcher to confirm the jurisdiction. The radio said state property, open to licensed fishing, and you could feel the moment the law landed in the grass and sat down. "Ma'am, this is a public waterway," one officer said, and the other asked Mr. Ellis if he'd had any alcohol, and he chuckled. "Only coffee." And the officer smiled. All the corners of the anger frayed a little. Then Sierra pointed at a lemonade stand that 2 kids had set up near the trail. A handwritten sign said all proceeds to flood relief. It was done for the day. A glass jar already fat with small bills. Sierra said it was unpermitted vending. The officer said, "Looks like they're out." And the edge in his voice was the one dads get when they're not going to write a ticket to a memory. He dropped a tin into the jar anyway. The officers left, because that's what you do when the law is clear, and Sierra didn't. Because that's what you do when power is a habit. The letter she drafted found its way to mailboxes by the next afternoon. It said no fishing would be allowed, within the confines of or adjacent to Mesquite Bend, for the safety of families and the character of the neighborhood, and that anyone choosing to recreate in ways better suited for indoor lifestyles should do so accordingly. It was all therein. The legalese, an attempt to stretch private authority over public space, to say our fences reach to the edge of your afternoon. I found Mr. Ellis at dinner that Sunday. He was quieter than usual. You know how elders get when they don't want to put their weight on anyone. He'd folded the letter into a precise rectangle like origami for frustration. So we opened a laptop at the kitchen table and did the only wild thing we could think of that didn't involve lawyers. We made him a Facebook page, Ellis and his river. We added the grocery manager who always asks about his blood sugar. We added a city councilman who owes him a favor from a 4th of July parade 8 years ago. We added the trash pickup guys who he tips with cold waters in July. We posted a note that said simply, "I was told I can't fish where I've fished since the Carter administration on public water by someone who called the police on me. Am I the bad guy here?" The flood of comments wasn't tidy. It wasn't a political movement. It was something better. It was neighbors remembering who they were, teachers who'd taught his kids, kids he'd taught to bait a hook, a nurse who said he told the best stories in physical therapy. People said, "We've got you." People said, "We'll meet you there Friday. Bring chairs, bring coolers, bring jokes." And because Texans will turn anything into a cookout given half a reason, Friday afternoon looked like a small tournament woke up and decided it was a reunion. We didn't call it a protest. We didn't call it a derby. We didn't register anything or rope off lots. 30 people stood along the bank like a dotted line. Somebody strung a banner out of butcher paper that said Red Arroyo Friendly Fish Off and all proceeds to flood relief. The lemonade stand reappeared with a bigger jar. A teen showed up with a Bluetooth speaker playing George Strait too softly to offend anyone. Mr. Ellis sat in his usual chair and tied his line with hands that had done harder knots and softer ones too, and the whole thing felt like exactly what it was, the opposite of trouble. Sierra showed up with a folder and a frown. She marched like a drumline in a parade that only she could hear. "Who's the organizer?" she demanded, and Mr. Ellis raised his hand like a kid asked to identify himself in his own living room. "If you want to call the police again," he said, "call them on me." And she did, because sometimes the lesson will not sink in until it's repeated for an audience. This time more phones were out. Because the truth is a camera now, officers arrived, same pair, same calm, and asked the same question. "Is this an event?" And Mr. Ellis said, "No, sir, it's Friday, and my friends wanted to fish." And that was that. Law has a rhythm when it's simple. It lands like a backbeat you can't argue with. The second officer walked to the lemonade table and put in another 10, even though the pitcher was empty and the cookies were down to crumbs. If there's a secret to a good ending, it's that it feels both inevitable and a little miraculous. Like, of course, the board met that weekend, and of course Sierra resigned voluntarily, and of course a plastic fish that sings "Take Me to the River" showed up on Mr. Ellis's fence with a handwritten note, "Champion." But it also felt like we'd witnessed a tiny recalibration, a reminder that rules behave better when people do. That private authority has a fence line built into it by design, and the river doesn't care about your stationery. Now, I wish I could tell you that was the only water that made trouble for people we love that month. But Texas has a way of telling more than one story at a time. Our friends Noah and Lila borrowed an RV to attend a wedding out by Cotton Willow Lodge. Pretty place near a wide bend of the Leon River where the buildings sit high on pilings like they know history personally. 2 hookups for RVs. A flat patch where 4 tents sprouted after the rehearsal dinner. Forecasts were loud, but the sky was quiet at midnight. And at 2:17 a.m. the manager's phone chirped a flash flood alert, and he swiped it away because waking sleeping guests felt like worse manners than water ever could be. By dawn, boats and a helicopter were patching the mistake. People were plucked from car roofs like lost luggage. Nobody died, and that's the miracle. But the river licked the RVs and the tents clean of anything resembling a good night. Noah's borrowed 1990 rig took 8 feet of water for 9 hours. They drained the oil and tried the starter. It groaned like a promise it couldn't keep. The mechanic offered $1,500 for the carcass and a shrug for the rest. Insurance said liability only. And acts of God don't carry receipts. The venue lawyered up and hid its policy behind a polite email. The contract said you break it, you buy it. Nothing about you sleep under our floodplain, we warn you. There are moments adulthood taps your shoulder and asks you what kind of person you want to be. Noah and Lila did the math, and then they did something bigger than math. They bought the RV from their friends over 12 months at the cost of a dozen date nights. Not because they had to, but because love makes you square the ledger when you can. They didn't sue. Though I'll say it out loud. The venue's ethics were washed thinner than their doormats. But the couple wanted to heal, not live in a courthouse. And sometimes that's the braver choice even if it doesn't trend. I'm telling you about the flood and the fish and the folder full of bylaws because they're all the same argument wearing different boots. Who owns what? Who decides when? Who picks up the phone? And where does decency sit when the paper runs out of lines? Which brings me, strange as it sounds, to Jenna, 18, a month into a call center job where the training said, "Be yourself, be warm, be human," and a new supervisor said, "Read the script word for word, or I'll write you up." You know what malicious compliance is? It's a fancy term for doing exactly what you're told until the absurdity shows up in the mirror. Jenna answered the next call like a robot reading to a robot. "Thank you for calling. My name is Name. I hope you're having a wonderful day. How may I assist you with your technical concern today?" The customer laughed and asked if she was serious. She was very serious in the most unserious way. The supervisor heard the theater from the aisle, pulled off her headset after, and said, "Why did you talk like that?" Jenna smiled with the kind of politeness that wins wars without firing a shot. "You told me to stick to the script." The next morning the rule changed back to what it should have been. Cover the key points, sound like a person. You see the echo, right? From code books to creek banks to crisis phones. Rules are scaffolding, not cages. They're there to hold up what we value while we add another story. They aren't the house itself. And when someone tries to stretch their authority past the property line, into your yard with a camera, into your pocket with a fine, into your Friday with a threat, you meet them with daylight and neighbors and the calm of someone who's read the map. Because the thing about maps is they show boundaries, but they also show routes, how to get from nonsense back to normal. I think about Mr. Ellis's hands, how steady they were tying a loop that morning while the air around him tried to invent a problem. I think about the officer's $10 bill buying a little mercy. I think about the Facebook page that taught a man born before Korea how to press post and feel a town answer back. I think about the RV with mildew and grit and a story that ends not with a lawsuit, but with a check written slowly. Month after month, I think about Jenna's voice turning a weaponized policy into a punchline. And I think about Sierra, how small she looked when the big machinery of common sense rolled past her clipboard. There's a version of America that's just paperwork and penalties, and there's a version that lives under porch lights and in casseroles and on riverbanks. And most days those versions sit fine next to each other, until somebody confuses authority with ownership, process with justice, safety with control, and then you have to choose who you're going to be. The person who calls 911 on a quiet morning because someone's joy offends your idea of order, or the person who shows up with a lawn chair and says, "What time should I bring the ice?" If you're wondering what happened to Sierra, rumor says she took her talents to a different development with stricter gates and more signage. I wish her well and fewer rocks to throw. What happened to Mr. Ellis is easier. He went back to the creek the next Tuesday because the catfish don't care about meeting schedules. He caught a wide mouth big enough to make the kids at the lemonade table clap. He held it up for a photo like he was showing a grandchild the world. He took it home for dinner. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the old thing. On his fence, the plastic fish still sings when the wind jostles it, and sometimes at dusk it feels like the whole neighborhood hums along. I'll end where I started, with a call you don't make and one you do. You don't call the cops to settle a score. The bylaws don't give you the power to win. You do call your people, and you write your name under your actions, and when the water rises you wake the sleeping and put them on higher ground. And when a rule is written against common sense you read it out loud until everyone hears how silly it sounds. Because the only authority worth keeping is the kind that protects dignity first and everything else second. Now I want to hear from you. Not in a whisper, but in the straightforward way neighbors talk across a shared fence. Tell me where you draw the line between community standards and personal freedom. Tell me if you would have sued the wedding venue or, like Noah and Lila, let it go for the sake of your sanity. Tell me if you've ever watched an HOA overreach and what you did about it. Tell me if you think Jenna was out of line or perfectly in it. Tell me what you'd have said to Sierra at the water's edge that day, or whether you'd have just handed her a cup and pointed to the lemonade sign. Because somewhere between paper rules and public are. Ivers is the town we're all trying to live in, and your story might be the map somebody needs tonight. Drop your take below. Argue with me if you must. Share your wins and your warnings. And if you've got a grandparent who fishes, tag them. Tell them the creek is still for everyone, and we'll save them a chair on Friday.